College of Health Science and the Career Services, and with the support and sponsorship of the Future Physicians Club, we are hosting a professional and graduate workshop series for the remainder of the spring semester. There are several workshops in that series. This is the first. This is your personal statement workshop on how to write personal statements. And then we will follow that up in about 2 weeks on March 11th, same bat time, same bat channel when it comes to Thursday, March 11th at 3 o'clock, where we will be doing interview and preparation. We will also be hosting a mini medical interview event. And then we'll have an application workshop as well in April with kind of our celebration moment of doing some panels with some of the applicants who are accepted this year to varying different types of professions and graduate schools. So that'll happen towards the end of April. So that's kind of what this is all about and what we're doing. So just to get us started, because we want to be mindful of your time, we're going to go ahead and start talking to you about, well, hey, how do I do this?
Hi, everybody. So we have 4 goals for today's meeting. It's where and how to get started with that personal statement. What are typical best practices? What to avoid? And then typical questions fellow students have asked. So you might be asking, why am I even writing a personal statement? Well, your grades and test score only tell a small part of the story. You have so much more to you than what you do in your studies. Admissions committees are looking for maturity and thoughtfulness. And the personal statements equal the totality of the individual. This is going to tell everything about you and everything that med schools and grad schools want to know. The bottom line is personal statements should help you stand out in a positive way. And why, we often ask, why do you want to be in that profession? Well, I mean, everyone here is going to say to help people. And this can be said about many professions. Personal statements can distinguish your motivation to help others. Where did this motivation come from? How is this motivation going to help you be a successful professional? There are a lot of careers that help people. How do you see yourself helping people? To you, Erin.
So in terms of the next kind of step, so if you think about the broad picture that Shannon shared in terms of being aware that this is meant to be a story about you, some of the mechanics that you need to be thinking about when it comes to graduate school applications and writing a personal statement is that some of them have a prompt. And so we want you to make sure that you read through that prompt and you follow through and understand what it's asking for. In terms of occupational therapy school and PT school and vet school, they do have a prompt. When it comes to medical school, PA school, public health, you don't have a prompt. You're expected to write about, you can either target a question or you can do some of those things. So in terms of the mechanics, make sure you read through the instructions. You probably have all heard me say that to you at least a gazillion times. But I'm serious, read through the instructions. Make sure you know how many characters you're allowed to have to write this. They vary from personal statement to personal statement and application service to application service. Make sure you know kind of some of the ins and outs. Ideally, what you want to also be thinking about is being aware that with a personal statement, you can certainly draft it in, say, Word, or you can draft it in Notepad, but you're going to want to make sure that you understand that there's going to be no formatting. It's going to be one huge paragraph. And so I do encourage students to think about writing it in a Word document and creating paragraphs and setting things apart so it's easier for you to concisely write it. But think about it as it's going to be one expanded kind of component depending on the required instructions and the expectations for the prompt. You're going to want to give yourself a good amount of time to write these. We purposely planned this for February because usually most of the application cycles will either open up in May, June, July. And so what you want to do is you want to give yourself enough time to do several different drafts. How many drafts? That's really personal for you. But what I can share with you is that, you know, I would be surprised if you got it done in less than 6, that you need to draft this a couple of times. You also need to be mindful of who should be looking over it. In other words, you can't be the only person that reads it. You really need to have someone else proofread it as well. We'll be talking in this personal statement workshop about some other kind of suggested concepts in regards to that. And keep in mind that this is meant to be more reflective in nature than descriptive. So it's easy to describe an interaction with someone. It's easy to have adjectives and put all of that out there. But openly, honestly, committees are looking for you to describe and reflect about what you learned. So if you're going to tell a story, I don't need to know the novel expression to put myself in that environment. I need to hear why I should care about it and what I've learned. So when it comes to brainstorming, again, you kind of have to go off of if you're going to need to write a prompt or not, but these are just some suggested areas that you could tap into. I strongly recommend students to have their experiences kind of already started to be drafted because they can be great resources. You could talk about something like customer service or jobs. You can talk about your experiences in internships. You can talk about volunteer experiences. Think about what speaks about who you are, where you're most passionate about. Did you have a really cool service learning project, or do you do something for fun? Think about, gosh, you know, did I have some events in my life where I experienced something shocking and new? Research, for example, is another place that you could target some of your topics in that personal statement. Something that students often ask me a lot of times is they'll ask me, well, gosh, you know, can I write about something that happened to me when I was a child? And I think that that's just fine. Just remember that can't be the sole conversation because they want to hear about the new person, not the child. So they want to hear about the adult that they're going to be interacting with. So when it comes to those prompts versus no prompt, in no prompt, I think that that can sometimes be one of the most scariest spaces to be in. So when you're asking yourself, gosh, well, I don't have a question to ask. What should I be asking myself to help me start it? Where do I even begin? And so this is an opportunity. It's not meant to be daunting or scary, but ask yourself some really big questions. Why? Why are you wanting to pretend the professional schools that you're wanting to go into? Why do you want to be a public health? Or why do you want to go into being a physician assistant, or whatever it might be? You also want to talk about doing what you learned. I think that is the biggest thing is really, what did you learn? What have you accomplished? What's of value? What do you think the role of a practitioner is, depending on what type of practitioner you're wanting to be? And you know, sometimes it's important to think about describing humbling experiences, but I always want students to think about being positive in their personal statement as well.
Okay, we have a little quiz here, friends. Of the following, which is better to include in a personal statement? Option 1, volunteerism in the hospital, or option 2, volunteerism in the community? Maybe at another organization like Girls on the Run or the food bank or something like that. Does anyone want to type in the chat maybe their thoughts, or anyone want to unmute themselves?
I'd say whichever one you can say more about.
Okay, thank you, Dalton. What else are people thinking? We will go ahead and lean into that. Yes, it is a trick question. Either can be good to incorporate into a personal statement. I know when I'm working with students, I often get the question of like, what's the best to talk about? What do they want to hear? And honestly, what they want to hear is what's meaningful from you. What they want to know is what meaning you have drawn out of your experiences. And so that's kind of something to think about, is what you focus on in a personal statement doesn't necessarily have to be things specific to your healthcare experience. Yes, that is very valuable to incorporate. However, I really want you to think about all of these experiences collectively that impact who you are and who you will be as a healthcare provider. Okay, little activity now. I'm going to give you guys 30 seconds or so. I want you to write down the top 5 words from this list that resonate with you and your experience up until now. So we have motivation, diversity, sensitivity, commitment, uniqueness, communication skills, sincerity, interest, humanitarian beliefs, honesty, compassion, enthusiasm, maturity, empathy, creativity. We're going to come back to these in 30 seconds. So I want you to write down your top 5, or maybe if there are only 3 that stick out to you. Which ones stick out to you and resonate with you and the experience that you've had up until this moment? Okay, we'll give it just a few more seconds. Okay, we're going to go on to the next slide now. I don't know if any of you have done a poll everywhere before, but if you're able, I would love for you to either get out your phone or go to the website at the top of the screen and text in your answers individually. So if you wrote down sensitivity as one and you're able to pull it up on your phone, I would love for you to go ahead and text in that word to the number that is on the screen. Okay, we'll give it a few more minutes for these to keep coming in. Okay, this is really cool, everyone. Thank you for chiming in. So as you're finishing this up, this is a Wordle that was created, and the size of each word is indicative of how many times that has been texted into this number in the last minute or so. And these are actually qualities that selection committees have identified that they look for on applications and in personal statements. And the reason I wanted to go through this exercise is to illustrate that even in this room, with just a handful of us that are in here right now, we all have different qualities that resonate with us based on our experiences and based on our interests. Because there's no singular right way to write a personal statement. Yes, you have the prompt that you need to make sure that you answer. Yes, you have the word count. However, it's called a personal statement for a reason, right? What they're looking for are these qualities. They're not looking for someone who's checking all the boxes in terms of the list of experiences they had. They want to know what experience you've had that has resonated with you and what that is. So it's okay for you to reflect on these qualities and reflect on what stands out to you and what you want to share about yourself to the committee that you're going to be sending your personal statement to.
All right, other tools to consider as you begin starting to think about writing this personal statement. So OWL Lab for Purdue, I'm sure a few of you at least have used this, especially if you've ever had to write a paper where you needed a bibliography or a works cited page. I would use OWL all the time to help me figure that out. But they also have pretty cool personal statement resources as well. So definitely check those out as you're getting ready to write your paper, as you're getting ready to review your personal statement, all that good stuff. And then if you are applying to any medical colleges or universities, definitely check out the AAMC, the American Association of Medical Colleges. They have a core competencies list of things that medical schools are looking for. And this can be relative to PA school, any kind of thing within the medical profession as well. these competencies are probably going to overlap here and there. So this might be a really good place to check out how to get some ideas on where to start in terms of what to really express within your personal statement. And then we have the NACE core competencies. So basically, the NACE stands for National Association of Colleges and Employers. And I'm just saying the acronyms just to flex on everyone, to show everyone that I know the acronyms. But NACE, they basically put out a list of 8 competencies that basically are what employers are looking for. So this can apply to medical school, it can apply to any sort of graduate programs, as well as any professional positions or jobs that you're going to go into after you are done with college. So these are just general good things to take a look at and to really reflect on and see where you meet those competencies. And some other ways to kind of weave those in is through mind mapping. So creating webs and circling back to things that you've done before and how that's kind of impacted you. Wayfinding map, so writing down everything that you've done that's had kind of an impact that feels meaningful to you. Value and strength finding. So at Career Services, we do a lot of assessments, and Strengths Finder is one of those that can be really, really helpful. So if you need any help with that, feel free to head on over to Career Services. And then you can also utilize us. So we within Health Sciences Advising, as well as in Career Services, we're really, really good resources, which is why we're here right now. So use us, and we have plenty of time for you. So come on and use us for personal statement work, resumes, applications, anything that you need when you're beginning and continuing this process. All right. So the to-dos or the not to-dos, and that is truly the question. So let's dive into style. What to usually try and do for style. So you want to speak formally if you can. You want to make it professional. Think of this as kind of a cover letter. So you're aiming for more professional, but it's going to be usually a lot bigger than a cover letter. So you're diving into a lot more personal details for you, but it's still in that formal style. Write in second person when possible. So for example, you would say when you don't grow up in a rural community, it may be harder to find clinics and hospitals from which to obtain shadowing and observing experience. So instead of saying, I didn't grow up in a rural community, so I couldn't find hospitals and clinics from which to obtain shadowing and observing experience. So you want to kind of stick with that like relatable second person language if you can. And then you want to write an active voice when possible, because you always want to take that active stance within your experiences. Like you chose to work or volunteer at a certain place, not the place like helped you with that. No, you chose to do that. So you really want to be able to own that. And active voice can help with that. So this is an example right here. So what I enjoy about serving in the Boys and Girls Club is influencing others by being a positive role model. So that's an example of active voice. And then passive voice would be saying being a positive role model is a skill that can be learned through the Boys and Girls Club. So there's no action in that second one. There's no part with you in it. So you really want to focus on being the protagonist within your personal statement. All right, and then style, do nots or don'ts. Don't try to be funny or use humor. It can be hard to avoid that sometimes, because I know you want to like let your personality in there and all that kind of stuff. And let me tell you, you can do that without having to make like blatant jokes in your personal statement. So your personal statement is your chance to show like integrity and genuineness, things like that. And sometimes humor can take away from that, and it's rarely done in a way that is helpful for your personal statement building and for helping the people who are looking at your personal statement get a good idea of who you are. And then avoid using the letter I if possible. Basically, I mean, you can use it like here and there, like within that sentence with the active voice. Like if it's about you, you can say I. But when just kind of speaking to like what others do or things like that, try and keep to that you or the third person as well. Okay, grammar. Ooh, this is a big one. So do use specific labels and full names of people or organizations. So you want to use physician or pay attention to physician versus doctor. So if you're applying for a doctorate program in music or English or something like that, you can definitely use that doctor phrase because, you know, they have their doctorate, things like that. But if you're referring to a physician, you want to refer to them as a physician, not necessarily a doctor. Try to avoid using acronyms as best as you can too. So PA versus physician assistant. And then really make sure that if you're applying to medical programs, especially within Boise, or if you're applying to a residency program at a hospital, that you're using the correct name of the hospital that you're applying to. A lot of people will say St. Al's or St. Luke's, and they'll use the wrong saint because they have different preferences. Yep, exactly. And they won't spell out the full thing either, which you want to do because that's their proper name. So really just be sure you're being as thorough as you can in terms of your labels and stuff like that. Okay, and do not try not to use contractions. They don't add to your word count, number one, and that's what you want to do, is try and kind of keep that word count going up. And they just kind of are more in that informal category rather than the formal category. Do not use quotes. I know I've seen this a ton where students will use a quote right at the very beginning to kind of dive into the paper. It can be impactful, but it can also be really cliche too, and they see it a lot. So try not to do that if you can. And then using the word it, they, or those. So this is where that you second person language will come in. And then also, I'm going to add this. This is a free improvised piece of advice, but make sure that you're using spell check. Like spell check and grammar check is there for a reason. So use what you can in order to make sure that everything's sounding good. You're not kind of making any of those simple grammar mistakes and things like that.
Alrighty, so this might kind of seem like an obvious point in your personal statement, but for the most part, you want to keep it positive. And if you are to address, something negative like a bad grade or, something that comes up throughout your life, it's important to make sure you kind of can explain why that's important. And as you go to the don't section of this, again, it touches on that. Only bring up those poor grades, if you really have a mission for doing so and it's effective. Another thing that is very important is, we love them. We love our moms, our dads, and our guardians, but, they aren't the most effective at reviewing your papers. They'll kind of hype you up and they won't really give you that honest feedback that is important when actually reviewing these sorts of personal statements. So when you are reviewing, it's really important to know who you want to look over it. And on campus, we have a lot of resources that are effective in that. We have the Career Center with Kelsey and Kelly. They're great and they're there to review those. Also, professors and Aaron's a great resource for that as well. And another key thing is when you're having your reviewers actually look over your paper, to provide them with some guiding questions, which I'll touch on in the next slide. So you would think getting as much feedback as possible on your personal statement is, ideal, but you can kind of oversaturate it if you have too many people reading it. That can give you conflicting sorts of, changes, and it will get really messy really quick if you have too many people looking at it. And do not have someone who is in the past applied to a program read it for the purpose of, seeing if that's what that grad school or med school is looking for. unless, you know, they've stayed up to date with, their mission and, the things that they're actually looking for on their application and their personal statement. So, like I said earlier, when you're thinking about people who you actually want to look over your personal statement, you want to think about, people who are going to do the best job. So, people who have a background in grammar, someone who is really trained with these graduate programs are looking for, and, someone who might not know you to the full extent, but knows you well enough so they can actually kind of see if the paper can describe you and, they can learn new things about you. They'll kind of let you know if the board actually reading your personal statement will be able to learn that too. And I touched on it earlier, but providing some guiding questions for your reviewers is important. They kind of have to know, what they're looking for. So some examples of that are, does this sound like me? What needs work and what was strong and what was clear, as well as, what can I improve on?
All right, guys, so now we're gonna start an activity really quick. So the first thing we'll have you do is bring out that pencil and paper from earlier that you used. And we're just gonna have you brainstorm for about 2 minutes about an experience that made you wanna pursue healthcare, whether that be, again, professional, volunteer, academic, something that truly influenced you. And then we're gonna, after that, have you guys go into some breakout rooms and get to share for about 3 minutes, and then the person will give you about 2 minutes of feedback, and then you guys can switch, do the same thing with their experience as well. But first, we're going to start with that quick brainstorm session.
As you guys listen to one another, try and think of like some helpful suggestions and give your partner some tips of like what they can clarify, what would make it more clear, and kind of what you got out of their experience, and then some guiding questions that would give your personal statement reviewers is like, did this showcase your skills, or was this strong, was it clear, what needs work? Think of those questions and the feedback that you can provide your partner.
We should all be back. We should all be back. McKaylee and Sydney.
All righty. So, like I said earlier, it is important to provide, whoever is reviewing your paper with questions, but you also got to ask yourself some as you're writing them. And here are a couple that we think are beneficial for you guys. So, how do my current activities reflect my values? What are you doing, and what kind of skills and of course values have you learned from those activities and experiences? Is this topic, I think, does it show something about my character, my personality? That's kind of connecting to your values as well. You're connecting to those experiences and kind of showing how they've shaped you, is a great thing to talk about in your personal statement. And is this a topic, I've cared about longer for more than just a year or two? I think that's important to mention as well. It shows you're committed to the field.
And then some other questions. How have I matured or changed in the last 3 to 5 years? You have evolved, you have changed as an individual, and that change is important. What you've learned, how you've adapted, that matters. And so definitely be open to talking about that and reflecting upon that question. Would I be interested in reading about this topic if someone else wrote about it? It's a personal statement. It's it's your statement. And so if you don't like it and you don't want to read it, then it's probably not the best personal statement, and it's not going to show you in your best light. And so definitely write about something that you thoroughly enjoy. And then, do you have a specific quality or attribute or skill that you feel like really distinguishes you from everybody else, or that you really align with? So if you feel like you're a really empathetic person and that aligns with your profession, then write about it. If you feel really or motivated or creative or any of those words that we kind of did in those activities, if they fit you, write about it. And then what do I need the committee to know, right? What is that activity? What is that experience? What is that reflection that just made me fall in love with this profession or made me want to choose this profession? Then that should also be included, because I think that's a big turning point in your college life that kind of preceded you to here. And so I wrote a personal statement. I'm on the other side. You can do it. I wrote it 3 years ago to get into OT school. And I wrote some of my like personal advice that I think aligns with a lot of those questions that I just kind of discussed. But definitely take your time. I mean, you guys are starting early. Don't push it. If you're like, I don't want to write this yet, don't write it yet, because it's not going to be your best work, right? It's not going to be something that you really are proud of. It's just going to be like, oh, words on paper, right? And then also with that taking your time, I think definitely find the words and phrases that you really align with. I always get like trigger happy on the synonyms like section in Word, and I'm just like, oh, that's a fun word. I'm gonna put that in there. Like, oh, that's really fancy or a big word. And I like, that's just not how I read or how I write or who I am as a person. And so I'm not gonna add all those big fancy words, because that's just not me. And that's not what my personal statement is going to kind of portray. And so that was something that I kind of had to steer away from, because it was just getting way too weird and wordy and sounded strange. And then I think my last one is like, you chose this profession because you love it. I chose OT because I just love everything about it. And so find out what you love about the profession. So kind of my main things were advocacy. You work with the vulnerable populations, right? Autonomy, you're working with independence, and you want people to get better, you want people to improve, and you want them to be as independent as possible. And then empathetic, right? I'm dealing with the vulnerable populations. You need to show love and you need to show care. And so I've filtered my experiences and my views through those things that I value about the profession. And so take it a step further too, and think about the profession, think about what you love about it, and then I'll kind of mix everything together, and it will form this statement that is you. And so that's my advice.
And I'm definitely on the opposite end of that spectrum. I had to write my first draft for a class this last month, and it, is tough. It's tough to reflect on those experiences that you've had. And I just submitted my first draft to my professor, and I got it back, and holy moly, it was just covered in red. It was covered in red. And at that point I realized it's going to need a lot more work. I usually don't do a ton of like drafts in my sort of writing, but what I've realized is that it's going to take a lot of work to, get that as close to perfect as possible. And what I talked about earlier in my slides, getting assistance from people who you can trust and who are, knowledgeable in the subject is going to save you a lot of time and a lot of frustration. And it's really going to help you out a lot. The main thing I would say, just I've learned from my first sort of draft, is the hardest part's kind of like connecting that bridge of your experiences and why you'd fit to your certain program. I think that's like the main part that's going to require the most thinking for you guys. And it is going to take time. So, it's going to be frustrating, but, keep grinding it out, and it'll all be okay in the end. So I keep telling myself, so.
All right. So we're going to start kind of listing out some typical frequently asked questions that we commonly see across. We've seen at our last personal statement workshop that we hosted last year, and we've interacted with as an advisor. So why don't we tick some of those off, Kelsey, on the main page? And why don't you all read through some of these, and let's go ahead, and if you want to put them in the chat, if there's one that's on there that you're like, I have that question, or if you want to verbally share that information, you are more than welcome to do so. But let's go around a couple of these. Let's see if we can answer some of them. So is there anyone in there that you're like, oh yeah, that is totally a question I have?
I'm going to vote for number 6. Should you address not having as much experience in one area because you enjoy your experience in another area?
I can answer that one. I think the key is being positive, and you don't want to put a spotlight on a negative. I think you should talk about the positive thing that you have an experience in the personal statement. You know, typically with primary applications versus secondary applications, and most graduate schools will do both. So they'll do a primary application with a centralized application service, and they'll do a secondary with their individual schools. The secondaries are where you can kind of get into the nitty gritty about the negative things, the addendums, or the things that you feel you lack for one reason or another, or interview questions. Those are more appropriate. I think you should talk about the thing you're most passionate about, the thing that you're like, I really love this, not that you didn't do that, right? So you didn't do research, but you volunteered at a place for several years because you were passionate about it. They want to hear more about that than they want to hear why you have a deficiency.
Erin, can I add to that?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to share as well that if you do want to add an experience of adversity that relates directly to the prompt or the experience that you're trying to say, you always need to make sure that that experience demonstrates growth and maturity and insight, and relate it to how it maybe formed your passion, right? That you went through a certain adversity and that experience really like forged your passion in this area. And because of that, it inspired or motivated you to volunteer at these places, or start reaching out and talking to these people, or getting jobs, or trying to get positions doing that. So you can talk about adversity, but you always want to make sure that the point is, like Erin said, that there's a positive message behind it. It demonstrates growth, insight, knowledge, and it demonstrates that it's connected in an important way, in a meaningful way somehow, to the pursuit of what you're trying to do.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks a lot, y'all. Oh yeah, that was fantastic. Thanks, guys.
Anybody else have any of these questions on the screen? They can be other questions too. That's totally fine. We have 2 sheets of this, so, and this is the time to ask questions. This is the best time.
I do have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah. Yes, please.
So, here, I'll turn on my camera too. I'm here. So when it says, you know, what kind of format do you do? I was wondering that as well, because I know you brought it up earlier where it will be that just kind of one paragraph lumped together. How do you make that flow with different ideas? Is it just kind of, you know, try to do it in, I'm sure you.
So to answer your question, there is no formatting.
Okay.
So it's going to be a huge text box that you're going to copy and paste as plain text, and the formatting goes bye-bye. But what you can do is so that you can feel the transitions occurring. I don't think there's anything wrong with writing your personal statement in Word. It's just that you might want to deliver, once you get it kind of in that concise, okay, this is the flow and these are the concepts. You're not going to bold it. You're not going to underline anything. You're not going to have subtopics or bullets. It actually says that in most of the instructions, in most of the primary application cycles, the certified application services. What you'll then do is you can put it in Notepad, and it'll take all the formatting out. And you can, then it's one big paragraph, and you can just easily kind of insert it in. But you're free to write it that way. Another way to describe format is, you know, we talked about that formal or professional writing, right? You're not writing a letter to your brother or your sister. You're writing a explanation, a document, an academic experience or exposure. So you need to use language that speaks like that. So that would be what I would say to the formatting. There is none in most of the centralized application services. That said, there are graduate level schools. If you're applying to medical school or something like that, you're going to use a service, and they're not going to format. And reading the instructions can help you with that. But if you're applying to like a graduate school where they're going to have you submit a Word document, I would say, I would use APA format if you were going to use it, to be able to identify it. But in most cases, there is no formatting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else?
I'd just like to add on to that really quickly, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Taylor and Erin have both talked about some really good points in terms of formatting and the writing style, right? To what Erin just brought up, being making sure that you're professional, and then Taylor bringing up using vocabulary that you would use, right? Writing in your own style. And there's a balance, I feel, that can be really key to a personal statement. And it's okay if it takes a few drafts to find that voice and find where that balance lies of professionalism, but also your writing, your prose. So if it takes a couple of drafts to figure that out, that's totally okay. And just kind of lean into that a little bit and figuring out how to translate this experience that you've had collectively to 500 words and on paper. It takes some practice, and that's okay.
Okay, perfect. All that helped a lot.
What else? What other questions do we have?
I kind of had a question. It's not one that's on here.
That's okay.
But kind of just like in general, when you're reflecting on certain experiences, is it better to like focus your reflection on how like it impacted you as a person, or reflect it on like how it strengthened your interest to go into that particular field, if that makes sense, or kind of try to just address both at the same time?
I'll respond to that. I think it's totally fine. It's important, I think, to articulate how an experience has shaped you and have, cultivated your passion for something, but you should always follow up with concrete examples to demonstrate that there's evidence, there's action behind that, right? So you went through a tough experience, or you went through any kind of experience, and how did that inspire you to lead to other actions or other things? And then you can bring those things into the fold too. And that just makes, that just enhances your experience there. So
yeah,
that was helpful.
Yeah, that is super helpful to think of it in terms of like how you turn that into action afterwards. So
yes, and that's what they want to see.
Yeah. Awesome.
And I would add to what Mary said to Emily. Your question was one or the other, and there isn't a one or the other. It could be either or. If you want to talk about in your personal statement and you have no prompt, and you want to talk about why that experience is important to your desire to want to become the thing that you want to become, great. If it's that you have an experience that's personally related to you, do that too. So there isn't a right or a wrong. I think you have to find the flow with what Mary was sharing.
Okay, awesome. Thank you for the feedback.
Other questions?
I have another question.
Yeah.
With one of the past workshops you put on, it was discussing like how you would explain your experiences. So you would be including that in your application as well. How would those experiences differ from the experience you would be using for your personal statement?
Great question. Does anybody else want to take it instead of me? I'm happy to. Okay, so ultimately, what Nicolette's talking about is in the application process for the centralized application services for most professional schools and graduate school to public health, you have a place to enter your experiences, and you're typically given somewhere between 600 and 700 characters with spaces for each of those experiences to describe and reflect. We want those experiences. We suggest that those experiences be reflective in nature, and that you write about what you learned from each of those experiences. And so Nicolette's question is related to, well, the personal statement and how do I write those experiences that I might have on my application already? And the key is two pieces. Number one, never regurgitate what you just said. In other words, don't duplicate, don't just copy and paste the experience that you've written into your personal statement. Expand on it. So what you want to do is, if you have a most meaningful experience, let's say there's something that's happened in your life, likely if it's a most meaningful experience, you have multiple stories to tell in regards to that experience. So I'll use an example. So CNA. So let's say you're a CNA and you've had multiple interactions with patients, and you reflect and talk about one you learned about in your experience component, but you really want to talk about that experience as a CNA in your personal statement. So tell a different story, tell about a different patient. And ideally, you can allow for those to be related to each other, and they should. It always surprises students to hear that medical schools, PA schools, PT schools, public health schools, they're not required to read your personal statement first. They can read your experiences first, or they can read your personal statement first. And so you want those to enlighten each other. You want them to be connected and really speak to who you are. So if they were to read your experiences first, they'd be like, oh, I want to go read this person's personal statement, and vice versa. And so that might be why I, as an advisor, recommend students to write out their experiences first, so that you have material to work with if you so choose. But interestingly enough, Nicolette, some people don't even write about their experiences in their personal statement. They might write about a more personal experience that relates to their desire or why they chose the experiences that are on their application. It can come a number of ways. It's your personal statement. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else want to add to that? No? Any more questions? We have one more slide that we can share some more that might come up. These are just to help you think about what you might be wanting to know about writing a personal statement that you may not have heard about today or have asked.
Can we go over the fourth question, the one about adapting your personal statement to the school's mission?
Anybody want to do that one?
Yeah, that'd be good.
I can talk a little bit about that. So that can be really, really helpful in terms of you getting ideas for key words to use. Like maybe say you're struggling to find a synonym for integrity or something like that. You can look at the school's mission, you can look at their values, you can look at their about page, and see if you can utilize the words that they're using to influence your personal statement. So you're using your language, it's your story, and you're going to be using phrases that stand out to them too and really help them connect with you on a different level. So that's what using their school mission statement, their school values, things like that can really, really be beneficial when using that in your personal statement. Now with like the big like systems, that can be a little bit more difficult to do just because you're trying to kind of apply to a bunch of different schools. But if you're applying to specific grad schools and specific grad programs, this is a really, really good habit to get into to really help them see how you explicitly fit their values and their missions. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Okay.
I would also add to that, Kelsey. If you're going to do it, make sure you look at multiple. If you're going to do it in your personal statement, if you're going to do it in the primary application and you are applying to multiple schools, you need to evaluate the entire set of missions and see how closely they align, because you want to be careful about being too individualized, because your primary application is going out to multiple schools. So use it for the value statements. I think that what Kelsey said was accurate to that. I would also tell you secondary applications are where they're going to actually ask you if you've actually done research on their mission. They often ask that question and ask you to explain yourself. So You don't have to put it in your personal statement, but if there are ideals that are in the mission statements at multiple schools that you value and you want to showcase those in your personal statement, you can. It's just that you're also going to get that opportunity in your secondaries to really dig deep into the schools. And you just don't want to ever single out one school on your personal statement. If you're applying to multiple schools, and they're all going to see that personal statement, right? UW is the place for me, and you put it all over your personal statement, that might dissuade a school from being really wanting to look at you because you've loaded yourself up, if that makes sense.
That's a good point, Erin. For, and I usually do more like graduate, not professional health school programs. But if you're doing it towards like a graduate program, a master's, PhD, or whatever, and they are individualized, then including their mission, it demonstrates that you've done your homework, right, on that particular school, and that you've committed some time to learning what they're about and how your values and your own vision and mission aligns with theirs. So it's a good point if you have one application that's going out to many, and if you're doing it solo, then it's I think that's the message that it sends to that particular school.
And I'll add one more little tidbit on that. Let's say you are at the point where you are customizing to each school. I like to kind of put the question in the head in students' heads or alumni's heads, is the fact that they know that you're probably applying to multiple schools, right? If you're eligible to apply to that one program, you're probably eligible to apply to many programs. And so using those missions can really help them understand that you are intentional about that school, and not just that mission, but also that program, and like what that program provides and how that aligns with your goals. Is that necessary to include in every application? Not necessarily, but just have that question in your head as you're brainstorming, as why do I align with this program? Why do I align with this school? And what I can contribute.
Other questions?
That all makes a lot of sense. Thanks, y'all.
You're welcome. Other questions? They don't have to be on the screen. We were just trying to help you think of some. And you can put them in the chat too. Nobody has questions? You have it all figured out?
Ms. Colburn, can we talk about how to adapt the story into a personal statement? Because we talked about where we didn't want to get too descriptive, but how do you know like what is enough?
So I think, in my experience, and everybody who's in the room that's an expert in this can pipe in too. I think it is better to draft an enormous amount of description at your disposal. In other words, if you spend 5 minutes describing that experience, you're going to have a lot to work with that you can go back and say, okay, what's the real point? What's the real nugget that they need to hear so that they know what I'm talking about? If you're applying to PT school and you're talking about an experience with a physical therapist, they know what that is. You don't have to go into enormous detail. They think about it this way. You have 5,300 characters with spaces, somewhere between 4,500 characters with spaces and 5,300 characters with spaces for most of these professional applications. SOPHIS, which is the public health application, they're 4,500 characters for graduate school for public health schools. That's not very many words. That's not. So what I usually say is go crazy, go do the descriptive giggle and make it until you can't stop anymore, until you're like, I have just adjectived this thing out. Then go back and cut out all of the things that really are repetitive, not necessary. Maybe you get it down to 2 or 3 sentences. I would hate to have someone's personal statement have the first 3 paragraphs describing the experience and the last 2 paragraphs, the reflection. It needs to be 80-20. 80% reflective about what you learned and why you valued that, and 20% descriptive of get me to the point. I'll use one example that I've had, and it made me laugh so hard when I read it. This gentleman wrote like a 3-page paragraph about jumping on Mexican trains in Mexico, about the laurel of it, the beauty of it, the extravagance of it. It was like a novel. And I was sitting there and I'm like, but why should I care? And he's like, well, it was really beautiful. I go, okay, so say it was really beautiful. And I said, but tell me why that experience is so important to you. And you know what? After he got done describing it, he couldn't actually tell me what was the most valuable part about that experience, other than he got cultural competency and he gained some of those things. And once he realized that those paragraphs were wasteful, he was like, wait a second, I need to tell a completely different story. And his draft changed. And that's kind of what happens is, and you might need another reviewer to read it to really see that you've gone too far, that you've described it to the point where it's like, nah, you could get rid of this or that, and you could still tell us what you're trying to tell us. But it's your story that we want to hear, not what you saw. It's what you learned. Why? Why do we care? Right? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, can I add to that?
Yeah.
So I would agree. So my first response to your question would be have multiple people review it. They will let you know, just like Erin said, what's too much and when you're done describing. The other thing I'll share is that when you are describing an experience, say you did a research experience, make sure to include specifics. Like if your study consisted of X number of students or participants, however long it lasted, what kind of methodology you used, you know, those pieces of information, that kind of detail will help the admissions committee understand that experience better. So there are some details that you're going to want to make sure to include, especially if it's academic, if there's a certain number of hours that you volunteered, you know, how many patients you saw over a length of time. Those would be important details in that description that you want to make sure that you don't skip out on. But yeah, and then making sure how it's always answering, why should I care? What's the point? And how is this answering the question and enhancing the experience that I'm trying to discuss, if that makes sense, and connecting it to the school or the program.
Thank you.
And adding on to Mary's point, something that I often remind students of is that you know yourself the best, and this is a stranger who is reading your entire experience in, you know, as an example, 500 words. And things that make sense to you in your head sometimes don't come full circle on paper, if that makes sense. Like you understand the meaning of your head because you understand yourself and you understand what you did. However, even though you may understand it in your head, you may not fully articulate that on paper, because that's kind of hard to do, right? This whole reflection can be really difficult, can be really challenging. And so I always encourage students to not be more wordy at first, but and be cognizant of the word count, but in your drafting, make sure that you go the extra step and share all of that information from start to finish, from experience to meaning, and then work with that reviewer or those reviewers to help you kind of wind that down a little bit and make sure the full circle is there, but also the meaning is there. So it's just really important to remember that you know yourself and you have to tell a stranger what you know. And so sometimes it takes that extra step that may seem weird, however, is often necessary to make sure a stranger knows all about you.
Thank you for your input.
Anybody else? So you can go out tomorrow and write your personal statements.
I kind of had like another general question. Should you kind of like focus on experiences from like start of your undergrad on, or is it okay to like address things that like got you interested in like say high school, or is that like too far back? I don't know.
I'll take this initially, and I'm sure there will be people who will add on. With your introduction, that's where you get to, my advice is where you get to kind of introduce yourself and talk maybe more about who you are and some memorable experiences from your past. But if you're doing like a free form, no prompt, then I would recommend sharing your most powerful experience first. And that can be and I really like, if you have some really amazing observation hours, right? You start talking about all the observation hours I had. I observed at numerous places, blah, 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 for a total of this many. And then you go into, one particular instance stood out to me that really motivated me, or, sealed the deal on why I wanted to apply or become a PA or whatever. And then you talk about that. You go more into depth and detail, but it's a powerful experience. So keeping it within the, I would say last 3 years, if you're going to do that. But that's just more of a general rule of thumb. I mean, if there's a major event that also happened in your life, you can include that too. But I generally think like if you have more of the observation, academic, patient experience, something along those lines, I would suggest going with that first, and then going with your most powerful, and then kind of weaving in some other parts later.
Okay. Thank you.
There might be other perspectives too.
I would just add, I think that's the hardest and the best part about writing a personal statement. The hardest is it's like, especially if it's open-ended, you're like, I don't even know where to begin, right? And so some students in past years have written chronologically, and some have done what Mary's suggesting, writing your best moment first, right? This piece of lattice. I think that some students have veered completely off of the whole experience railing list. And what I would share with you is you never want your personal statement to sound like a resume. So you don't want to just rail off a whole bunch of experiences in your personal statement. You want to highlight. So it's kind of like a cross between a cover letter and a autobiography, right? It's like the little happy balancing place in between those things. And some students have written a cute little quaint, this is why I was inspired to be ... in their beginning intro. And some have jumped right in and said, I know this is what I want because of something that's relatively recent. You don't want to sound juvenile or immature in a sense that you don't only want to talk about those past experiences before you're undergraduate. So it needs to be a healthy blend, in a sense that they want to know who you are right now. And so that one of those trigger questions we used in the PowerPoint that we used today was, think about your last 3 to 5 years. What could you say about that during that time that's of value to you? And then go back a little bit further and see if there was something that inspired you. One of my students wrote about, he had a Fisher-Price stethoscope when he was a kid, and he followed his dad around the family practice office with it. And that was really important to him. That was his spark. That was the thing that started it. But that wasn't the breadth of who he was. So I think it can go a number of ways, especially when the prompt is so open. And that's what's beautiful about it. It's just hard to get that started.
I would also suggest, Emily, to read a few examples of other people's personal statements. They're all very different. So you'll get an idea of different ways in which people have talked about their experience and see which one that lands with you. And it will also give you some ideas too on how you can talk about it and organize your experiences in a way that you'll like.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
We have,
That's really helpful.
yeah, we have 4 copies of Getting into the Medical School of Your Choice essays. So there is a book, and there are several written, but we have 4 copies in the office. And if you want to borrow a copy, I'm more than happy to get one for you and reach out and connect with you. You can also get it on Amazon, Kindle, Barnes and Noble. I'm not trying to say, promote Amazon or whatever it is. There's ones for PA school and medical school, but my favorite one for all schools is by Barone, and it's Getting into the Essays that Get You into Medical School. And I'll put the link in the chat.
Erin, I'm
Shannon
showing it on my screen.
also-
too.
Yeah, Shannon is doing a nice Vanna White.
Oh,
Of the-
awesome. Okay, I
So
wrote
I'll
that
put the
down.
link from Amazon because I know that it's on the Kindle for $10 and it's paperback for $7.99 or $7, or you can get it used. So, but we do have copies in our office, and you guys are more than welcome to ask us if you need a copy of it to borrow. So I just put that in the chat. So as we're wrapping up, we're here to answer your questions. So we're happy to do that. But Kelsey, could you put the QR code back for the survey on the main screen? We'd like to hear from you how we did. And then we'd also like you to go back to those 2 questions we asked you to ponder before we started. How confident do you feel about writing your personal statement? And answer those questions for yourself now. See how you feel. But we're here to answer your questions, but we want to be mindful of your time too. So if anybody needs to head out, we'd just like you to fill out that survey. Please.
On my phone, I don't have anywhere to scan it. Oh, never mind. It's posted in the chat. I was just going to say, if y'all just send me the link.
Yep, we just posted, or I just posted it in the chat as well. So all feedback is appreciated. So thank you for taking the time to do that.
Appreciate it.
My advice for those who are going to be applying in June, get started on it now if you haven't already. It's going to take some time.
And please know the Career Services, these workshops are presented by Career Services, College of Health Science Advising, and the Future Physicians Club for that purpose, for you to get started early. And please know we're here to help. So, and there are a number of us in this room that can read personal statements, that can walk you through the application process, and can be of assistance. We can also give you other ideas for reviewers. I always use the Writing Center for proofreading and grammar and those such things. I think they're very, very powerful opportunities. But please feel free to use this. We're here for the
Thank you also to the team who was here to present and organize the event.